As silly and fun as Deltarune is, it is a game that has a whole lot going on in the background, and as a text can be read in many different ways. If you're someone who watches Deltarune analysis videos and are as terminally online as me, you're already very much aware of that, and also very much aware of the whole pile of out there analysis videos circulating the internet. So it's time for me to add on to that pile. What I want to explore in particular is a connection I see between Deltarune and the work done by French theorists Gilles Deleuze and Félix Guattari. This will not be the most cohesive or organized video, but the general things I want to develop on in this video are twofold. One, I want to explain some of Deleuze and Guattari's concepts through Deltarune in a hopefully approachable fashion. And two, with the knowledge of these concepts, I want to apply them to Deltarune and see how the game can be read through this lens, and see if it offers any new insights. Quick side note, this video is very front-loaded with all the sort of dense philosophy stuff, so if you want to skip to here, don't feel too bad about it though. A lot of this stuff might not make sense, but it'll be Deltarune related, so it's a bit more approachable, but you can always just go back and watch the denser stuff afterwards, if you feel up to it. Okay, bye! A lot of this content will be very difficult to parse or understand, but I hope I can try to make it as understandable as I can, so at least you get something out of this video. Before we jump straight in, how about some background information? Who even are Deleuze and Guattari, and why should you care? Well, Gilles Deleuze was a French post-structuralist philosopher who was actively writing and doing philosophy from the 50s until his death in 1995. His work encompassed a lot, from larger big-picture philosophical work to explorations of past philosophers like Nietzsche and Bergson, to books on literature or cinema. To actually sum up his work in just a sentence or two would be impossible, so here's some books he wrote on the screen. Félix Guattari, on the other hand, was a lot of things. Whereas Deleuze was pretty rooted in academia, Guattari was involved in a variety of fields. He was a philosopher, a psychoanalyst, and was involved with a whole bunch of radical and militant groups. He also wrote some screenplays too. Much of his writing was very unorthodox to his contemporaries and was overall a super out there and creative person when it comes to his work. Both of these figures have their own individual writings, but when they worked together it really sparked something in both of them. Deleuze focused Guattari's writing, while Guattari opened up Deleuze to a lot of new ways of thinking and formulating ideas. The two books that came out of their collaboration were Anti-Oedipus and A Thousand Plateaus. The contents of these books in particular is something that I see resonate with Deltarune a whole lot. Now, I'll probably bring in some other stuff from other theorists maybe that I think is relevant, but it's those two books I want to hone in on. So what exactly brought me here? In these specific moments of the game, Kris becomes a body without organs, as the title suggests. If you have at all engaged with Deleuze and Guattari, these moments are so explicit in their message and their connection to their work that you'll understand immediately why I've become obsessed with this topic. For the 99% of you that don't know, one of the core concepts that is used repeatedly throughout Anti-Oedipus and A Thousand Plateaus is the notion of a body without organs. Even just the name of the concept clarifies the connection that is present and why I am obsessed with this. It is staggeringly literal in Deltarune. Obviously this could just be a fun little commonality that they share and that's that, but actually looking at both the game and these concepts in focus shows a lot more resonance than just something superficial. So what actually is a body without organs, and why does it relate to Kris? Or how does it relate to Kris? The answer unfortunately isn't very straightforward. It's important to note that Deleuze and Guattari do not keep this term static, and so the concept is kind of fuzzy. Deleuze first uses the term even before writing Anti-Oedipus with Guattari in his book Logic of Sense, and throughout all of their different works the concept changes along with the passage of time. This constant state of flux is very fitting for what the concept is, but it does make learning about it a whole heap more difficult. As a result, I cannot really explain what it is in its entirety. if there even is an entirety to it. I can only give you an approximation. I am, however, drawing primarily from the body without organs present in 1,000 Plateaus, and largely sticking to the concept without bringing in a whole lot of the other sort of connected concepts. Stuff like desiring machines and the nitty-gritty of how it functions in the psyche and the 3 syntheses and all that. It's important stuff, but for now we'll just set it aside and sort of, understand it's there, but, I won't bring it up. That'll just overload this video way too much. And it'll be confusing enough as it is. So, where do we start? The best place to begin, I think, is to just throw a very loose definition out there. Very, very generally, the body without organs can be considered to be a virtual body of pure potentiality. This still leaves a lot to understand, but it gives us a starting place. Now, with the loose definition of a body without organs thrown out there, what does it actually mean? What even is a body in the first place? What is an organ? I think the best way to explain is to start from the smallest component and work upwards. In their work, Deleuze and Guattari use the term organ and machine fairly interchangeably. The word machine, I think, will help clarify the concept a little bit. When they use these terms, they're not referring to literal organs and machines, albeit those are good examples of them, but rather as a more general term that refers to a thing and its relation to the things it interacts with. An organ is something that produces and breaks off different flows, and connects to other organs, which in turn also create and break different flows, and so on and so forth. For example, the mouth is an eating machine, cutting off the flow of, say, cake, which produces a new flow of chewed up mush to the stomach, which interacts with the flows of acid, and then forms a new flow into the intestines. But the mouth can also be a musical machine and connect socially. Going even more abstract, one of the examples they give in the book is that of the orchid and the wasp. Even though they are physically quote-unquote separate, the wasp becomes the reproductive organ of the orchid. This idea isn't limited to purely individual things, of course. Collectives can be machines too. So as you can see, there's all sorts of organs, all sorts of machines. As they say in the very first chapter of Anti-Oedipus, everything is a machine. So, now that we know what an organ is, we can start to understand what a body is too. A body is essentially any whole composed of parts, where each part stands in a definite relation to one another as capable of affecting or being affected by other bodies. The human body is an example. The skin, the bones, muscles, and everything else, when all slapped together in relation to each other, form the body. A school is another example. A body composed of the building, the teachers, the students, the books. A musician's discography is a body of their artistic work. What's important to note here is that the body is defined by the relation of its parts, rather than the opposite. The body doesn't dictate the parts, it's the parts that when placed together form a body. As a result, a body can take many forms, and its real limits are to what capacity it can affect and be affected. The body does not have to have a hierarchical or dominant mode. The Spinoza quote, "Nobody knows what a body can do," is very apt. So, we have a body that we now know is composed of organs. We know how those organs relate to each other and compose a body, but if a body can be anything, why is it that things aren't constantly in flux? This is because the body becomes organized. Deleuze and Guattari make a distinction between a body and an organism, in that an organism is a unified and hierarchized body. That is to say, the flows between machines in a body are organized and structured. The machines, rather than flowing into one another to their full capacity, every which way, are instead directed towards their habitual forms, allowing some flows to pass while excluding and blocking off others. As a result, an organism tries to maintain itself by blocking off flows that exist outside of its structure. All bodies are organized to some degree, it's just a matter of intensity. Some bodies are more organized than others. For example, the human body organizes itself in a variety of ways, such as through the immune system, through having skin, but is also flexible in many ways, and allows some things to pass through. It's exactly here, at this discussion of organization, that we can finally begin to look at the body without organs. What it is, how it works, and how it actually relates to Deltarune beyond just haphazardly slapping Kris onto the idea of one. As I stated earlier, the body without organs is a virtual body of pure intensity and potentiality. Going with what we know already, it can be said that it is a body with zero organization. While the name may suggest the body without organs is against organs, that's not actually the case. It is against the organization of itself. It is without organs as part of it, but organs still interact with it on its surface. Organs come and go, but it rejects organization outright. The body without organs is not separate to an organism as well, but rather, an organism is just a constriction of the body without organs. The body without organs still exists underneath everything. Going back to my definition, it is virtual. Much like the image in a mirror exists, but only virtually, the body without organs exists virtually behind an organized or stratified body. In Anti-Oedipus, Deleuze and Guattari described the body without organs as an egg crisscrossed with axes and thresholds, with latitudes and longitudes and geodesic lines, traversed by gradients making the transitions and the becomings, the destinations of the subject developing along these particular vectors. Looking at this egg, you see these lines, which connect everywhere, go to all places on the egg, all sorts of territories. Much like a real egg, it's just an undifferentiated goop. But when you hone in on these lines, extrude them out, you start to see that the organism arises along a particular set of these lines on the surface of the body without organs. Strata begin to form. An organized body is a stratified body without organs. So, once again, going back to the very beginning, what does it mean to become a body without organs? Plainly, it is turning an organized body into that undifferentiated mush of potential. It is about your ability to change and reshape a body. It is about deterritorialization. Okay, that was a lot. That probably made zero sense to you, but if you have followed to at least any extent, you might be wondering where it actually comes into play in Deltarune. Now with that all over, I think we can start to look at. If we look at it for just a bit, we can start to see how it sounds pretty familiar when it comes to Kris. Looking at Kris, there's a lot going on with them as a character. To keep this video at least slightly grounded, I'm not going to start going into speculation about what's truly going on with Kris or their situation prior to the events of the game and, you know, all that shit. That would quickly devolve into a whole mess, and frankly, it's not even really relevant for this video. What is important, however, is understanding Kris's general situation. I used this word before and I'm going to use it again now because it'll become very important in this discussion, but we have to look at the territory Kris is situated in, not just physically, but every territory they inhabit. So let's take a step back. Unlike Undertale, which depicted its themes through a more symbolic approach, Deltarune clearly points towards very real and contemporary issues in a much more overt manner. There is no Great Barrier, there's only blocked roads and private property. There is no king, there's only corrupt officials and bureaucratic neglect. There are no legends, there is only organized religion. There are no mythological tragedies, there's just bullies, homelessness, divorce, and missing children. You get the point. These aren't separate issues, however. What glues these things together is the overarching alienation of an increasingly atomized world, even in places that you'd think would be close-knit. It's often joked about how Hometown needs a therapist, but this misses the point in that it doesn't address the root cause of the problems, only the symptoms. The root of the issue here is not individual in nature. In Anti-Oedipus, one of the critiques of psychoanalysis that is put forward by Deleuze and Guattari is that it entirely ignores the social and political aspects of mental illness. This is further reflected on by Mark Fisher in like 2009 in his book, I think so. Anyway, an individual might be mentally ill, but they don't exist alone. They are situated in a social field and are affected by it. As a result, the crux of so much of the conflict in Deltarune isn't really individual as it is social, although it might manifest as looking as individual. Not all of it though. Definitely not all of it. What plagues much of the residents of Hometown is a feeling of being trapped in existing social formations. Formations that are flawed and end up doing more harm than good, and with seemingly no way to escape them. Hometown itself expresses this sort of entrapment. Perhaps it's my own subjective perception of small towns, but there's an overwhelming melancholy to these places. Like, nothing changes in these small towns, you know? It's always the same buildings, the same people, the same everything. The thing that stands out to me, at least, is the relationship between this sort of stationary town and the passage of time. The town envelops you from both sides, on one side in nostalgia and romanticization of a happier past, and on the other with a wall that limits you from moving into the future. The town itself acts as this black hole that captures any possibilities, and just leads you down a path of dejected nihilism, an acceptance of the present state of things no matter how bad, locking you into inaction. It's just how things are. Some people can escape the gravitational pull of this capture by leaving the town itself, like Azrael. And now that I think about it, maybe even Des, but I'm not delving into that speculation. So, you know, that's something for you to chew on. There are the exceptions like those ones I just mentioned, but most people are stuck. This is seen in a large number of the major characters. Kris, Susie, Noelle, Birdley. They all share these insecurities in one form or another. These four are the most obvious examples, but this anxiety runs through far more than just them. You can see it all throughout Hometown, and it's not even limited to just Lightners. No matter who, your choices don't matter. Haha, in-game text. So, this is the territory Kris is situated in. Not simply a physical territory, but a social territory, an emotional territory, a political territory, and importantly, an unmoving static one. One that is not exactly conducive to living a fulfilling or happy life. At least not for everyone. But, with the events of Chapter 1, that starts to change. A thing or two shifts and that dislodges everything else and things start to spiral. Like throwing a pebble into a pond, one action sends ripples and difference to every other part of the pond. And here is where the body without organs comes in. This change we see is the function of the body without organs. Without the possibility for change underlying everything, nothing would happen in the first place. So the process of becoming a body without organs is this activation of change, of deterritorialization and destratification. How I look at it personally is almost as a circuit breaker. When you're in a static position, unchanging, you're in this circuit of behaviors and functions. Things work smoothly or not so smoothly, but what matters is it functions. And that function doesn't change or doesn't change outside of the given parameters of that specific circuit. With Kris, they wake up, they go to school, they're kind of a loner loser, they go home, they go be depressed or whatever. Becoming a body without organs is allowing the flows of desire to cross those wires in that circuit. Something shorts and everything starts to work differently. Everything that was there before still exists in the circuit, but it's just been rerouted, reorganized. The flows have been redirected. With Kris, that initial switch was us being put into their body. The relationship between them and their soul was deterritorialized, shifted out from its current mode and reterritorialized into a new form. That reterritorialization then reverberated into everything else. Just by one thing changing, a whole new array of possibilities has opened up and new lines of flight can be went down. The second deterritorialization that we experience in-game is the quite literal change from the territory of Hometown to that of the Dark Worlds. I think by now the point is clear. But these things are not instantiated by Kris, so is it actually the body without organs at work here or something else? Well, like I said, bodies without organs are everywhere, underlying everything. Kris tearing out their soul is the most obvious example, but it's not the only one. However, what Kris's case does show is the specificities of intentionally becoming a body without organs, and something that struck me is the attention to detail in the way they do it in the game. The way Kris interacts with the soul perfectly demonstrates the care you should take while becoming a body without organs. When Kris tears out their soul, they don't just take it out and stay like that. They are careful with destratifying and only do it briefly. They take the soul out, make the changes they want, unplug the TV, get some pie, whatever they did during the time, make the fucking Dark World. That's a whole heap of things. And then, after all that, they place the soul back inside them. Kris clearly understands the necessity of returning back to an organized state. In A Thousand Plateaus, Deleuze and Guattari stress the necessity of being careful when becoming a body without organs, as Kris demonstrates. They say you need to destratify not with a hammer, but with a scalpel. You can see in the way they walk, shambling across the room, that despite the freedom they have to do anything at this point, they're in a precarious and unstable state. Becoming a body without organs is a balancing act. The more you destratify yourself, the more at risk you become of just collapsing entirely. From Guattari and Deleuze directly, quote, "You have to keep enough of the organism for it to reform each dawn. And you have to keep small supplies of significance and subjectification, if only to turn them against their own systems when the circumstances demand it. When things, persons, even situations force you to. And you have to keep small rations of subjectivity in sufficient quantities to enable you to respond to the dominant reality. Mimic the strata. You don't reach the body without organs and its plane of consistency by wildly destratifying. That is why we encountered the paradox of those emptied and dreary bodies at the very beginning. They had emptied themselves of their organs instead of looking for the point at which they could patiently and momentarily dismantle the organization of the organs we call the organism." This rings true for Kris to a T. They understand the delicate balance involved in this process. But funnily enough, we do also see what happens if we destratify too quickly in Deltarune. The Snowgrave route is an amazing example of this. When Kris becomes a body without organs, they make small, gentle changes, but when we take the reins and do it throughout the duration of the Snowgrave route, we go all in. We absolutely deterritorialize and break down all the machines of the game. Everything is restructured. Instead of pacifying enemies and making them run away, that process is deterritorialized and then re-territorialized into them being frozen to death. The path that is taken is restructured, dialogue, the relationships, all are flung out from their normal formulation, broken and turned into something new. But important to note, it's something dangerous and non-emancipatory. When Deleuze and Guattari talk about these dangerous lines of flight, they talk about two kinds: suicidal lines of flight and fascist ones. Snowgrave I would consider pretty obviously to be the embodiment of this fascist line of flight present in Deltarune. As was said before, the body without organs is the pure potentiality of a body and as a result contains all possibilities, including negative ones. Moreover, the body does not exist in a vacuum. Other bodies without organs can be present and interact with Kris. Deleuze and Guattari state, "The strata spawn their own bodies without organs, totalitarian and fascist bodies without organs, terrifying caricatures of the plane of consistency. It is not enough to make a distinction between full bodies without organs on the plane of consistency and empty bodies without organs on the debris of strata destroyed by a too violent destratification. We must also take into account cancerous bodies without organs in a stratum that has begun to proliferate. The three-body problem. The stratum that is present on Kris's body without organs is us, the player. We are the organized form of Kris in this situation, and in the Snowgrave route, we become that cancerous body without organs. We take over Kris and become the dominant form of organization, with all other flows passing through us rather than Kris. What happens is that we overcode those flows with our own values, which, in the case of the Snowgrave route, is to be nasty and rude and murderous and all that. How the route follows a fascist line of flight is pretty self-explanatory, I think. The overt murder, the weird, uncomfortable, and the incredibly Oedipal relationship between Kris, Noelle, and the soul, and the striving for power and control. To clarify, no, Oedipus is not simply "I want to fuck my mom," at least in this context, but rather it refers to a repressive structure of desire and representation formulated by Freud and kept to some extent by Lacan. What I love about this example is that it's not only an in-game example, but almost a real one too. We are participating in an active process of breaking the game to a point where it functions, but unrecognizably so, and such a manner that is negative or counterproductive to the well-being of the body of the game. Obviously, the game is programmed to do this, and so we are not really breaking the game, but narratively we are. Getting off track a bit here, when I think about it, speedrunning is almost like a practical example of this process as well, in like the way you're entirely reconfiguring how the organized system of the game functions, just crossing all these wires, and sometimes even literally with like that fucking quantum bullshit, cosmic ray garbage that happened that one time. Yeah, and like if you go too far and screw it all up, then you can just soft lock the game and you have to reset. So I guess in some sort of way, speedrunning is becoming a body without organs. But don't read too deep into this though, this is just an aside and just rambling, but you know, there might be something to it. Anyway, back on topic. Deleuze and Guattari lay out the risks, but they also provide a safe way of approaching this process to avoid this risk of going down a dangerous path. Lodge yourself on a stratum, experiment with the opportunities it offers, find an advantageous place on it, find potential movements of deterritorialization, possible lines of flight, experience them, produce flow conjunctions here and there, try out continuums of intensities segment by segment, have a small plot of new land at all times. What they're saying here is to experiment where you can, see what possibilities you have at your disposal, but while you do, it's important to keep a little bit of your old self intact, and keep some of your home in your back pocket, because then, no matter how much you experiment, there will always be somewhere you can go back to and rest. I think looking at Kris through this lens helps us understand the relationship that we, the soul, have with them. There can be an initial negative reaction to learning that we, the player, inhabit and control Kris, one of revulsion at the thought of being the one to take away the control of this character. This is an understandable and entirely reasonable reaction, and reading Deltarune through this narrative of who controls bodies, who judges what is the right way for bodies to exist, is something that is definitely present in Deltarune and should definitely be looked at. I'm sure there's a Foucauldian reading in there somewhere. What's great about art is that there can be simultaneous readings of the same text, and while the contents may differ and contradict at times, both can exist at the same time. So, contextualizing the player's soul as merely one form of organization of Kris's body, we can understand that's not an entirely negative relationship. The previous stratum that Kris was lodged on had long since ossified and hardened, and they couldn't really get out of it themselves. Only after what was most likely Gaster shenanigans, or who knows what at this point, was Kris able to start moving for themselves. Even under this sort of strict control that they're now under, there's a plasticity to it that wasn't present in the previous stratum they were lodged on. The current one might be more directly controlling, but the previous one was controlling in a different way, in a more static, overbearing way, I guess. Structural rather than like a direct do this, do that kind of thing. Anyway, analyzing Deltarune through this way also solidifies the themes of change present in the game. It shows that the current state of things is not static and can change. It has not always existed and doesn't have to keep existing either. The only way for that to happen though is to start moving, become nomadic, experiment, see where you land. As a parting word, here's a quote not from Deleuze or Guattari, but from an essay titled Criminal Intimacy by the Mary Nardini Gang, which I think sums everything up pretty well. We must make ourselves bodies without organs. Within each of us is contained a virtual pool of everything we are capable of becoming. Our desires, affects, powers, ways of acting, and infinite possibilities. To embody and activate these possibilities, we must experiment with the ways our bodies act in conjunction with others. We commit crime together so we can unveil our criminal becoming. Thank you for watching. There's a lot more that could be extrapolated and explored when it comes to Deltarune and the works of Deleuze and Guattari, a lot more. However, with the amount of stuff that could be talked about, I decided it would be best to really just focus on the body without organs. If you're interested at all in any of this stuff and want to delve deeper into it, I'll link some channels below in the description, stuff that I find genuinely helpful. Shoutouts to all the folks at Acid Horizon and the Machine Unconscious Happy Hour podcast. He makes some extremely useful learning resources, and I would not know half the shit I know without them putting in the work to learn it for me. Before you go, I just want to mention that I'm working on a cyberpunk thriller visual novel called Butterfly Circuit. A free prologue is currently available to download on Steam and itch, so if that sounds like your sort of thing, go check it out please, and make sure to wishlist it. Some of the music in this video was also from the soundtrack too, which is on all the streaming platforms as well as Bandcamp and Steam. Also, if you want to support my work, consider supporting me on Patreon! Bye!